The thing about almost all phishing emails is that they do tend to adhere to some common patterns. Patterns that the adept recipient should be able to identify before falling victim to it. I want to start to run through some of these patterns, and I'm going to use real-world phishing emails that I found in my email account. Let's start with this one. Branding inconsistency. We usually have a pretty good sense of what an organisation's brand looks like. So in this case, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. If you're a customer of CIBC, you'd be aware of their logo, the colours they tend to use, the layouts they tend to use. If you were to see an email like this and ask yourself, is this consistent with the communication that I normally receive from CIBC, you'd have to conclude it wasn't. This is quite clearly a phish, and if you read past the content itself and look at the overall structure of the email, it becomes quite evident it is not in keeping with normal behaviour. And that's one of the key things, specifically about phishing, but also more generally about social engineering. Is this behaviour normal? Let's take a look at another example. Here's a PayPal phish, and for the most part, this is actually pretty well put together. The branding is what I would expect from PayPal. It's got the PayPal logo, the PayPal colours. It's well formatted. But let's look at the sender. The sender's name has been entered as PayPal service, but look at the domain that the email address has come from. Update with 2 P's, -information.com. This does not look like a PayPal domain. So right off the bat, we should be suspicious just based on the sender. But we can also see an issue down towards the bottom, in that last sentence. Pay particular attention to the words please and your. The casing's wrong. They should both be lowercase. It should be a lowercase p and a lowercase y. And this is the sort of things that an organisation such as PayPal is very unlikely to get wrong. Now, we often see this in phishing emails. In fact, we often see much more obvious mistakes. We see spelling mistakes, we see grammatical mistakes. Mistakes that are unlikely to be made via a large organisation sending out emails like this en masse. Most phishing emails only take a cursory read through the content to figure out very quickly that they're not legitimate. But there are other patterns we can look for beyond just what's immediately visible as well. Have a look at this one. This is a really good example where here we have a hyperlink towards the bottom of the email, and the hyperlink is written as outlook.com. However, if we place the mouse over that particular hyperlink, we can see that it's actually going to go to a completely different domain name. So here the attacker is trying to obfuscate the underlying hyperlink, and they're trying to do this to trick us into believing that if we click that, we're going to go to outlook.com. Identifying suspicious URLs of what will ultimately be a phishing page asking for personal information is a really key skill when it comes to identifying a phishing email. Now, it's very easy to do this on a PC by just hovering over the link, but it's also very easy to do it on a mobile device by clicking and holding on the link. So here's what I saw on my iPad when I read the same mail. I don't have to follow the link. I just have to click and hold, and I can clearly see that this link is going to go somewhere entirely different to what it's representing. They're just a few very basic fundamental signs we can see in many phishing emails. But there are also other patterns to look for, in particular, the patterns that exploit human weaknesses. Let me give you an example. Early on in the course, I spoke about various human behaviours that we would normally consider to be a virtue, actually being a weakness when it comes to social engineering. And sympathy is one of them, and this is a perfect example of how the attacker attempts to exploit that. So here, the email is represented as coming from someone who's suffering from ovarian cancer. This email is attempting to elicit sympathy from the recipient. It's one of the very first things that's said, but it then goes on and starts to exploit another human weakness. And I can show you that personified in this next email. Greed. As soon as people see an opportunity to make money, very often their better judgment departs them. In this case, the scammer is talking about $18 million, and all they need is a little bit of help from the recipient, and that person will retain 10% of the capital. It sounds very lucrative, but inevitably this will then descend into a phishing campaign where the attacker monetizes their efforts. As I mentioned earlier on in the course, when you receive emails like this, have a think about what is the weakness in you that the attacker is trying to exploit. Let's look at one more. Fear is another really common one. We spoke about that earlier on in the course as well. In this case, the social engineer is trying to convince the victim that there's a security problem with their Royal Bank of Canada account. All that the victim needs to do in order to verify their identity is just click on that link and then inevitably provide the attacker with what is usually quite an extensive amount of personal information. Consider a victim who is fearful of someone else accessing their bank account. Their guard would be down. They'd be very focused on how to protect their account and less likely to think about, is this actually an attempt to break into it? Now, of course, in a case like this, we can also see other call signs of a phishing attack. We can see that the email address of the sender is odd. We can also see that there's no formatting at all on the email. This is not what I would expect from a bank. So very often we're seeing multiple indicators of a phishing email when these attacks come through. Some people believe that such obvious flaws in the structure of the email is to try and separate the targets, such that only those that are gullible enough to believe this email will actually progress and then fill out personal information. So they'll be the high-value targets to the phisher because they've shown sufficient lack of judgment to proceed with the attack. Certainly, there could be a degree of that, but I'm also very fond of Hanlon's razor, which states, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. So it may well be in many of these cases that those attempting to mount the phishing attack just simply aren't very good at it. So there's some call signs of phishing emails. Let's now move on and have a look at some call signs of phishing pages.